Well, let's talk about California, because I think, we're all residents currently of California. But let me just put it out there. How many people on the call are considering leaving California? Anybody? Is that going through anybody's mind right now? Because it's going through mine.
No. It's not for me. But I think that California is sort of emblematic of what could happen if you actually have, the legislative bodies plus, the top sort of political leader up and down on one ticket. I mean, you basically have like massive rife incompetence. And it's been compounded. If people who are Democrats would have said, oh, the best thing that can happen for Democrats is if you have, local cities plus an assembly, plus the state Senate, plus the governor as a Democrat. Republicans would have said the same thing for Republicans. But as it turns out, it basically creates the worst outcomes. And so instead, what you need is a little diversity of ideas and a little push and pull. But California is like a bunch of clowns in a clown car right now. It's a joke. But I'm not going to move. Now, right. A part of it I'm not going to move is my taxes I've set up in such a way where California can't get access to most of my assets anyway. So, they can pound sand.
Definitely believe to say on podcast.
Yeah. David, how are you, Sachs, how are you feeling about California right now? And just the craziness in San Francisco, the homelessness problem in San Francisco has become acute during this. It's really
it's a disaster.
And then the wealth task on top of it, and
it's a disaster. It's a disaster. I'm not leaving or anything, but it's certainly a topic of conversation that's come up a lot. And I do know people who have left. I know a couple of people who, prominent people in the venture community who've recently moved to Austin, and it's a horrible time for the city and state to be proposing all these new taxes. As just take one example, because people are already realizing that because of COVID and this new sort of work from home and Zoom business culture where you can kind of work from anywhere, that people are realizing they don't need to be in San Francisco or in Silicon Valley anymore to be, in the technology industry. And so at precisely the time that people were reevaluating where they wanted to be, realizing that they could be anywhere, California is now, proposing to massively increase the cost of being here. So it's horrible timing. And then, you do have this sort of seemingly chronic issue in San Francisco, particularly with the sort of homeless problem. Just seems to keep getting worse. And there's sort of this weird hostility to technology and tech workers here that I think is somehow used as a scapegoat to prevent the city from dealing with its real problems.
And what do you perceive those real problems to be in the city? You use the term homeless. I think most people looking at the problem, as one person candidly told me, what we have is not, and I won't say who said this, but it's a prominent person. They said this, Jason, the issue here is this isn't a homeless problem. This is a junkie problem. And they specifically said, I'm using that term because that's the term to refer to people who are addicted to opioids, methamphetamine, fentanyl, and that if you were to actually unpack what we're calling a homeless crisis, it's actually a crisis of drug addiction, and specifically fentanyl. And I don't know if you guys saw, we're going to hit something like 500 overdose deaths this year. We're like going to double last year, and it's all fentanyl, which is a particularly, deadly drug. So, how much do you think that is the problem, David?
Huge. You're right that homelessness is not the cause of the issue. The homelessness is the consequence of long-term drug addiction and mental illness. It's the end state. And you're right. The city it's not really tackling the underlying issues. In fact, it's kind of aiding and abetting them. How many millions of needles does the city give away every year? And then it only collects a small fraction of them, with the remainder ending up on the streets. It's bonkers. And I think part of the problem is that we keep saying that until we is that we can't demand any improvement in the situation in terms of homeless people. We have this like poop squad in San Francisco that's literally cleaning poop off the sidewalks because homeless people are using our sidewalks as like a latrine, basically as a bathroom. What you keep hearing is that, well, we can't do anything about that problem until we solve the homeless problem. And and certainly we should try to solve that problem, but it's a very long-term, difficult, intractable problem. In the meantime, we can certainly do things like demand that homeless people not do that.
Yeah, and the policing there seems to be a distinct issue with policing right now. I watched the San Francisco Tenderloin Twitter account, David Freeberg, and they've arrested something like 260 meth and fentanyl dealers, but we have a DA, Chesa, I believe his name is, who doesn't believe in prosecuting any of those crimes related to drugs or petty crime. Freeberg, what has the city turned into for you as somebody who's been a long-term investor in the Bay Area?
Well, I moved here after I graduated college in 2001, and I loved San Francisco. It was a quieter city and a quainter city. I honestly, over the years, have found the traffic and the congestion and the buildup of the city to be frustrating. I'm a little bit of a anomaly in this sense, because I think a lot of people, think that the city should continue to grow and progress and build housing and so on. Those are all fine objectives, but I think the quality of life has degraded for some time in the city as infrastructure hasn't kept up with the changing pace of companies growing here. And as a result, we've kind of got this ballooning, inflating budget that's been poorly managed. You've got, I forgot the statistic, but there's some number of thousand people plus that are city government employees in San Francisco earning over $300,000 a year. And so there's a chronic kind of bureaucratic issue that is the cancer that has caused a lot of the follow-on crises that I think we're now experiencing acutely here in the city. Now, in terms of leaving, to your earlier question, I was really I've just been like everyone, I call it, kind of talk about the Dante Inferno layers. It's also like, for me growing up, it's like a 7-layer burrito. It's like one layer of shit after another. Start with the beans, and in the middle you got the sour cream, and this city's just gotten and the state has gotten more and more difficult to live in. And I was certainly thinking and talking to my wife, like, we got to leave. Her family's here, so we're not going to leave the state. But then I get a call last week that I think 18 of us were on with Governor Newsom. And, he made a couple of really interesting points that really did honestly reset my perspective. I've tried to take a step back and think a little bit more broadly about the long-term opportunity in California. The way this state operates right now, it's the 5th largest economy in the world. They ran a surplus. They're refinanced their debt. They've done a great job kind of managing kind of the fiscal gap that's being created by the COVID crisis. And Governor Newsom made a point, like, we have had the California exodus story that's percolated and cycled really for decades. He pointed out an article, which I've not been able to find, but I've been looking for it, from Time Magazine from 1959, that declared this is the year everyone's going to exodus out of the state. And we hear it every couple of years. There's some crisis that precipitates the mass exodus. And it hasn't happened because it is a great place to work. It's a diversified industrial base. It's not just tech. Tech is a lot of the growth, but there's a lot of industry here. Largest ag producer, largest large military aerospace industry, and on and on and on. It's a great diversified economy. It's a great diversified cultural base. It's by the oceans. It's by the mountains. It's an incredible place to live and work. And I don't think any of us want to give that up. And the media has done a great job kind of magnifying these small stories that aren't really a story. Governor Newsom made the case that this wealth tax proposal, was one assembly member. It didn't even get into committee. It wasn't even really being considered, but it kind of created this press flourish, and everyone got involved, and everyone I know kind of freaked out about it, and it became this kind of another catalyzing event, but it wasn't really real. So if we kind of broaden our perspective a little bit, both in terms of space and time, I think we get a little more kind of comfortable with, like, of all the places to live and all the places to work, this is the best. And you can go save some taxes and move to Austin, but I mean, then you got to go live in Austin, whatever.
Well, it's the best. You're right that it's the best in terms of climate, geography, natural beauty, resources, and the industries that have developed here and have strong network effects. But it's not the best politically. I mean, it's among the worst politically, and it seems like the politicians are doing everything they can to mess it up. I mean, I almost wonder if there's like a resource curse issue, particularly with San Francisco, where there's this thing in this observable thing with governments that that sometimes you get a resource curse where if there's like a lot of oil in the country or something, you end up with a government that's not very good because people just spend all their time going to war to try and capture it. And I kind of wonder if, San Francisco has been the beneficiary of being proximate to Silicon Valley, this enormous like wealth creation, prosperity, job creation ecosystem that it had nothing to do with creating. And
Yeah. I would say two things to build on what you're saying. The first is I think that when the economies in an environment are really, really good, all the really, really smart people want to go into those economies, and that leaves generally dumber people to do things like politics. So, and that's less true in places that have shittier economies.
Yeah, it's fascinating.
And I actually think that that's practically true. We may not want to think it, and it may sound a little harsh, but it's true. And the way that you reverse it is what Singapore does, which is you make the civil servants the highest paid people in the economy, right? And you treat them like knowledge workers, and you say, "Wow, look, I'm going to pay this person $250,000, $300,000 a year." You're shocked at the quality of the person you get. That's the first comment I want to make. The second one, though, is that unlike all these other times where I think people have been sort of prognosticating the doom and gloom of California. The thing that's different now is that because it is such a dominant political environment for the Democrats, it's much easier to judge if they actually know what they're doing and if they are going to do things that are aligned with the sort of like the moral code of the party that elected them. And so, like, let's just talk, for example, about the fact that we are not going to have police reform of any kind in California, which is where you'd think would be the first state where people got their act together and said, okay, if we really believe that we need to reform police, we can do it in our own backyards. But that legislation is going to get blocked because Californians have decided that they care more about the alignment to police unions than they do to the right of law and to social justice for minorities and blacks. That's crazy.
We should be the most progressive, is your point on this, Chamath. And the point is, to say it explicitly, is the politicians are in the pocket of the unions. And because they're in the pocket of the police unions and the education unions, we cannot make forward progress, even though we're supposed to be the most liberal of all locations, correct? That's in summary.
Yeah, exactly. We actually, if we believe that we have, up and down the ticket, the ability to implement justice, right? At least justice in the vein of the Democratic Party and what that platform represents. Or, for example, all of the people that were out protesting, okay, during Black Lives Matter, during that entire movement, I suspect the overwhelming majority are Democrats/progressives. Or, let's just say the majority, or at a minimum, the plurality, okay? But then the idea that then you have a state, the most populous and the richest, filled up and down the ticket with people who are theoretically aligned with those political values. But then when push comes to shove and the legislation hits the floor, it basically gets mothballed, to me is inexcusable and disgusting.
Yeah. I mean, look at the housing issue. We just had a bill that was an incredibly simple bill. I think it was SB 1120. I don't know if you followed this one, but I've been following it on the Twitter. And it was a very simple piece of legislation. Any single family home lot could have a duplex on it. So you could have two homes on a single lot. And they couldn't even pass that in a city where, a firefighter, a teacher, et cetera, cannot live within 90 minutes of where they work. And they couldn't even pass that.